He slammed his heavy, scarred hand onto the mahogany table, the deafening sound echoing through the dead-silent restaurant. "No man touches what belongs to me," the Mafia boss growled, his dead-eyed stare fixed on the curvy, fat woman pouring the coffee. The room froze. The only problem? She wasn't his waitress. The air inside Santini's Prime, a shuttered, old-school Italian steakhouse on the gritty edge of South Philadelphia, was thick with the smell of stale cigar smoke, aged leather, and impending violence. To the outside world, the restaurant had been permanently closed since the sudden passing of its owner, Albert Santini, a month prior. The heavy iron gates were drawn shut, and a faded condemned notice from the city zoning department was taped to the front glass. But in the sound-proofed VIP back room, it was business as usual for the Costello crime family. Clara Higgins did not know this. She also did not care. 32 years old, armed with a master's degree in forensic accounting and an undeniable, unapologetic physical presence, Clara was not a woman who intimidated easily. She was fat, a descriptor she had claimed and weaponized years ago against a world that constantly demanded women shrink themselves. She carried her 240 pounds with the solid, grounded authority of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. Her thick thighs, wide hips, and full, round stomach were clad in a practical black wrap dress, though it was currently covered by a stained, oversized white apron she had found in the kitchen to protect her clothing from the restaurant's decades of accumulated dust. Clara had inherited the building from Albert, her estranged great-uncle. For the past 3 hours, she had been in the basement, hauling boxes of ledger books and bank statements up the narrow wooden stairs, trying to untangle the financial nightmare he had left behind. She had discovered shell corporations, registered in Delaware, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and glaring anomalies in the meat supplier invoices. Exhausted, thirsty, and covered in cobwebs, Clara had marched up to the main kitchen, brewed a pot of cheap, bitter coffee, and followed the low hum of muffled voices into the back corridor, assuming a group of squatters or city inspectors had broken in. She pushed open the heavy oak double doors with her hip, balancing a tray with a coffee pot and a single mug. The scene inside froze instantly. 6 men in tailored Italian suits sat around a circular poker table. The tension in the room was so thick it could have been cut with a meat cleaver. At the head of the table sat Dominic Costello. Dominic was a ghost in the criminal underworld, a man whose real name was whispered in federal wiretaps, taps but rarely spoken on the streets. Tall, broad-shouldered, and possessing a face that looked like it had been carved from cold marble, Dominic radiated a terrifying, quiet authority. His dark eyes locked onto Clara the second the hinges squeaked. To his right sat Anthony Santoro, a twitchy, hot-headed capo who was currently sweating through his silk shirt. Dominic had been in the middle of quietly dismantling Anthony's alibi regarding a missing shipment of untraceable automatic weapons down at the Navy Yard. Anthony was desperate, cornered, and looking for a distraction. "What the hell is this?" Anthony snapped, his voice cracking slightly as he turned his panicked aggression toward the door. "Who let the fat broad in here? We closed the restaurant, you stupid cow. Get out." Clara paused. She didn't drop the tray. She didn't gasp. She simply stared at Anthony, her dark eyes narrowing, assessing him the way she would a particularly annoying mathematical error on a tax return. She took a slow, deliberate step into the room, the heels of her boots clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. "Excuse me," she said, her voice smooth, calm, and utterly devoid of fear. "You deaf?" Anthony barked, standing up so abruptly his chair scraped violently against the floorboards. He was trying to play the tough guy, trying to show Dominic that he was in control of something, anything, in this room. He stomped over to where Clara stood, completely misreading the situation. He saw a plus-size woman in a dirty apron carrying a coffee pot, and his arrogant, mob-addled brain registered her as a lowly, disposable waitress who had somehow missed the memo that the restaurant was closed. "I said get out," Anthony sneered, reaching out and grabbing Clara's upper arm with a bruising, forceful grip. He yanked her forward, intending to shove her back out into the hallway. "And leave the coffee. Actually, no, pour it first, then get your heavy ass out of my sight." Clara's jaw clenched. The coffee in the glass pot sloshed dangerously. She planted her feet, using her low center of gravity and substantial weight to completely halt Anthony's momentum. He yanked again, surprised that he couldn't move her. "Let go of my arm," Clara said. It wasn't a plea. It was a warning. Before Anthony could open his mouth to hurl another insult, a sound ripped through the room. It was a low, guttural, terrifying vibration that seemed to rattle the crystal glasses on the mahogany table. Dominic Costello stood up. He didn't rush. He moved with the terrifying, fluid grace of an apex predator. He slammed his heavy, scarred hand onto the mahogany table, the deafening sound echoing through the dead-silent restaurant. "No man touches what belongs to me," the Mafia boss growled. The temperature in the room plummeted. The other men at the table, seasoned killers and hardened enforcers, visibly recoiled, shrinking back into their leather chairs. Anthony froze, the blood draining from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. His grip on Clara's arm went entirely slack, his fingers trembling as he slowly turned his head to look at his boss. Dominic's dead-eyed, obsidian stare was fixed on Clara. He wasn't looking at her like she was a waitress. He was looking at her like she was the only oxygen in a burning building. The room was perfectly, horrifyingly silent. Anthony slowly backed away, raising his hands in surrender, terrified that he had somehow offended the boss's secret mistress. The only problem was, Clara had absolutely no idea who this terrifying, handsome man was. Clara brushed a speck of dust off her sleeve where Anthony had grabbed her, her expression perfectly composed. She set the coffee tray down heavily on a nearby serving cart. The glass pot clinked against the ceramic mug. "First of all," Clara said, breaking the suffocating silence, her voice ringing out clear and sharp. She looked directly at Dominic, completely ignoring the terrified Anthony. "I don't belong to you. I don't belong to anyone. Secondly, this is a private building, and you are all trespassing." A collective, sharp intake of breath echoed around the poker table. One of the men in the back, a heavy-set enforcer named Leo, actually crossed himself. No one spoke to Dominic Costello like that. People who spoke to Dominic Costello like that usually ended up at the bottom of the Schuylkill River, weighed down with industrial cinder blocks. Dominic didn't pull a gun. He didn't shout. Instead, a slow, dangerous smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. He stepped away from the table, closing the distance between them until he was standing less than 2 feet from her. He was towering, standing 6'4", but Clara didn't shrink back. She held her ground, her lush, full figure squared off against his broad, muscular frame. "Trespassing," Dominic repeated, his voice a dark, velvety rumble that sent an involuntary shiver down Clara's spine. His eyes slowly raked over her, taking in the soft curve of her jaw, the defiant fire in her eyes, the swell of her heavy breasts under the wrap dress, and the flare of her wide hips. It wasn't the dismissive, mocking gaze she was used to getting from arrogant men. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hunger. "That's a strong accusation for a waitress serving coffee in a condemned building." Clara let out a short, cynical laugh. She reached behind her neck and untied the strings of the stained white apron, pulling it over her head and tossing it carelessly onto Anthony's empty chair. "I'm not a waitress," Clara said, reaching into the pocket of her dress. The men in the room tensed, hands dropping instinctively toward the concealed holsters beneath their jackets. But Dominic held up a single finger, silently commanding them to stand down. Clara pulled out a folded, thick stack of legal documents and slapped them onto the mahogany table, right over the scattered poker chips. "My name is Clara Higgins. I am the sole heir and legal owner of this property," she stated, her tone shifting into the crisp, no-nonsense cadence of a forensic auditor presenting a damning report. "I'm also a certified public accountant, and for the last 3 hours I've been sitting in the basement looking through my late uncle's books, or more accurately, his second set of books." Dominic's smirk faded, replaced by a look of sharp, calculated intensity. "You boys have been sloppy," Clara continued, crossing her arms over her chest. "Uncle Albert was running a decent front, but whoever is managing your LLCs is an idiot. You've been inflating the meat supply costs by 300% to clean your cash, routing it through a dummy corporation in Newark, and pulling it back as franchise equity. It's amateur hour. A first-year IRS agent could dismantle your entire laundering operation in an afternoon with a calculator and a half-decent subpoena." Dead silence fell over the room again. Anthony looked like he was about to pass out. Leo was staring at Clara as if she were a mythological creature. Dominic looked down at the documents, then back up at the fat, beautiful woman who had just waltzed into his secret headquarters and calmly dissected a multi-million-dollar money-laundering syndicate. "You came up here to tell us this?" Dominic asked softly, taking another step closer. The scent of him, expensive bergamot, dark roast coffee, and a hint of gunpowder, wrapped around her. "You walk into a room full of armed men, tell them you know how they wash their blood money, and you expect to just walk out?" "I expect you to pay your rent," Clara shot back, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. "Uncle Albert's legitimate estate is underwater. The property taxes haven't been paid in 2 years. By my calculations, your organization owes this estate exactly $412,000 in backdated lease agreements and hazard fees for utilizing the basement as a, well, judging by the bloodstains on the concrete, an interrogation room." Dominic actually laughed. It was a dark, rich sound that seemed to surprise his own men. $400 grand, Dominic said, shaking his head slowly. He reached out, his large, calloused fingers gently brushing against the soft curve of Clara's cheek. The touch was electric, a startling contrast to the violence that permeated the room. Clara's breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. "If I don't see a wire transfer by Friday," Clara whispered, her voice losing a fraction of its volume, but none of its steel, "I turn the books over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have copies locked in a safety deposit box at Chase Bank. If I go missing, they get mailed directly to the district attorney." "You're a very dangerous woman, Clara Higgins," Dominic murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His eyes dropped to her lips. "I like dangerous." Before Clara could formulate a sarcastic response, the heavy oak doors at the end of the hallway exploded inward with a deafening crash. "FBI, nobody move! Drop your weapons!" The muffled chaos of heavy combat boots, shouting agents, and the aggressive clatter of tactical rifles flooded the corridor. The raid had been triggered. Dominic's eyes flashed. In a fraction of a second, the calm, intrigued man vanished, replaced by the ruthless syndicate boss. He grabbed Clara by the waist, his massive arm locking around her waist, lifting her entirely off the ground. "Hey!" Clara yelled, kicking her legs. "Shut up if you want to live," Dominic hissed, hauling her toward the kitchen's hidden walk-in freezer door. Just as the first flashbang grenade shattered the back room's expensive stained glass window. The world dissolved into a blinding white light and a ringing explosion. But all Clara could feel was the iron-tight, possessive grip of the most dangerous man in Philadelphia, pulling her into the dark. The freezing air of the walk-in meat locker hit Clara like a physical blow, a shocking contrast to the humid, blood-pumping chaos exploding in the back room. The heavy steel door slammed shut, cutting off the deafening crack of tactical gunfire and the screaming commands of federal agents. Plunged into sudden, absolute darkness, Clara's senses were overwhelmed by the metallic scent of raw beef and the intoxicating, spicy cologne of the man practically carrying her. Dominic did not hesitate. His massive hand slid from her waist, grabbing her wrist with a grip that was firm but surprisingly careful not to bruise. He pulled her past rows of swinging meat hooks that rattled ominously in the pitch black. "Keep your head down and step exactly where I step," Dominic ordered, his voice a low, vibrating hum in the freezing darkness. "I can't see a damn thing, you lunatic," Clara hissed, her chest heaving as she struggled to keep up with his long, urgent strides. Her thick thighs brushed together beneath the fabric of her wrap dress, her practical boots slipping slightly on the frosted tile floor. "And you need to let go of me. I have absolutely no intention of becoming an accessory to whatever federal RICO statutes you are currently violating." Dominic didn't answer. He reached the back wall of the freezer, his hand finding a concealed latch behind a massive side of frozen beef. With a harsh metallic groan, a section of the insulated wall swung outward, revealing a narrow, damp staircase descending into the earth. The faint, sickly yellow glow of emergency battery lights illuminated the path. "Move," Dominic commanded, gently but firmly pushing her ahead of him into the stale, earthy-smelling tunnel. As Clara descended, the reality of the situation washed over her. These were the old Prohibition, bootlegging tunnels that crisscrossed beneath Passyunk Avenue, urban legends that old-timers swore connected the speakeasies of South Philadelphia directly to the Delaware River docks. The air down here was thick, smelling of mildew and century-old brick. Behind them, the muffled sound of a heavy breaching charge echoed through the earth. The FBI had blown the freezer door. "They're inside," Clara said, her breath catching in her throat. "They won't find this door. It's on a magnetic seal wired into the primary breaker. Once the power gets cut, it locks from the inside," Dominic stated, finally slowing his pace. He moved around her in the narrow space, his broad shoulders brushing against the damp brick. He turned to face her, the dim yellow light casting harsh, devilish shadows across his chiseled face. His dark eyes swept over her full, curvilicious figure, lingering on the heavy rise and fall of her chest. "You aren't panicking," Dominic noted, a slow, predatory smirk returning to his lips. "Most women, most men, for that matter, would be screaming right now. I'm an accountant, Mr. Costello. I panic over missing decimal points on quarterly tax filings, not heavily armed federal agents, Clara retorted, leaning back against the cool brick wall to put an inch of space between them. It was a futile effort. Dominic was too large, his presence too consuming. Besides, the FBI doesn't execute a no-knock raid on a shuttered restaurant with 50 tactical agents unless they have an ironclad warrant. Which means someone handed them something concrete, a ledger, a hard drive, or a co-conspirator's confession. Dominic's eyes narrowed, the smirk vanishing instantly. The dangerous mob boss returned, his mind working with terrifying speed. We sweep the restaurant for bugs every week. The digital servers are encrypted off-site in the Cayman Islands. The only way they got enough probable cause for a tactical breach is if someone on the inside served it to them on a silver platter. Someone who was desperate, Clara murmured, her analytical brain immediately piecing together the financial puzzle she had been working on in the basement. She looked up, meeting his dead-eyed stare. That rat-faced man sitting to your right, the one who grabbed my arm. Anthony Santoro, Dominic growled, the name tasting like poison in his mouth. In the ledger I was reviewing, there was a massive discrepancy in the Newark meat supply front. Clara explained, her hands instinctively moving as she talked, mapping out the numbers in the damp air. $3 million bled out over the last 8 months, funneled into a Delaware shell company called Blue Heron Holdings. But whoever did it was incredibly sloppy. They filed the LLC under a registered agent in Wilmington, but the tertiary beneficiary was tied to a personal checking account at Chase Bank. I memorized the routing number. Dominic stepped closer, completely invading her personal space. He placed a heavy hand on the brick wall beside her head, trapping her. He wasn't intimidating her. He was intensely, completely captivated. You deduced all of that in 3 hours? It's basic forensic tracing, Clara said, refusing to break eye contact, though her heart was hammering violently against her ribs. If Anthony is stealing from you, he knows it's only a matter of time before you find out. The easiest way to erase his debt and take over your territory is to give the FBI just enough evidence to lock you away for life. He tipped them off. He triggered the raid to get rid of you. Dominic stared at her, a strange, dark hunger burning in his eyes. He reached out, his thumb dragging across her bottom lip. Clara gasped softly, her lips parting involuntarily. She was a large, imposing woman who was used to men looking past her, treating her as invisible, or being intimidated by her sharp tongue and unyielding confidence. But Dominic looked at her as if she were a goddess carved from marble and fire. You are a terrifying creature, Clara Higgins, Dominic whispered, his voice rough with sudden, undeniable lust. You just saved my life. I just protected my $400,000 settlement, Clara corrected sharply, though she didn't push his hand away. We need to move, Dominic said, stepping back, though his eyes never left hers. The tunnel ends at a storm drain near Tasker Morris Station. I have a safe house in Society Hill. We're going to pull those banking records, Clara. And then I am going to bury Anthony Santoro. The penthouse in Society Hill was a masterclass in modern, sterile wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the glittering Philadelphia skyline, the Delaware River reflecting the moonlight in the distance. The apartment was completely unregistered, purchased through a blind trust, and hidden behind 3 layers of corporate anonymity. Clara sat at the massive marble kitchen island, an open encrypted laptop illuminating her face. Despite the dirt on her dress and the exhaustion deep in her bones, she was completely in her element. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, hacking through public business registries and cross-referencing the financial data she had committed to memory. Dominic stood near the window, a glass of amber scotch in his hand, watching her. He had shed his ruined suit jacket and unbuttoned his crisp white shirt, revealing a sprawling, intricate tapestry of dark ink tattoos across his heavily muscled chest and arms. He couldn't take his eyes off her. The way she commanded the room, the unapologetic sup she took up, the fierce intelligence radiating from her. It was an intoxicating narcotic. "Got it," Clara announced, hitting the enter key with a triumphant snap. "Blue Heron Holdings. The registered agent is a law firm in Wilmington, but I bypassed their firewall and found the initial FinCEN filing. The suspicious activity report triggered a flag last month. The secondary signatory on the account is Maria Santoro, Anthony's sister." Dominic's grip on his heavy crystal glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. He washed the stolen money through his sister's name. The coward. "He didn't just wash it," Clara said, turning the laptop so Dominic could see the screen. "He transferred $2.5 million into an offshore account in Cyprus exactly 12 hours ago. He was liquidating his assets. He knew the raid was happening tonight. He planned to let you get arrested, clear out the cash, and vanish. Not vanish.